Okay guys, so I welcome you all to today's tutorial. So in the previous video we had looked at the first lesson under chapter 1 with regards to the course workshop technology. So in that particular video we also looked at the outline and what is required of us to know under chapter 1. So you guys make sure to watch this particular video. Yeah, so in this particular video we're looking at a practice question from an exam, and we're trying to understand how questions are normally phrased on chapter 1. Yeah, so without wasting much of time, let's just quickly get into it. So the question says, read the guidelines, then shade the box with the correct true or false answer to the following statements. So the first question says, a sharp chisel is safe to use than a blunt chisel. So do you guys think this is true or false? So there are two boxes, so you either shade true or false. So let me say, in this box we'll be shading true, and in this box we'll be shading false. Yeah, so with that said, this particular statement here is pretty much true, because when you have a sharp chisel it's much safer to use than a blunt chisel. The reason being is with a sharp object you get to use less force as with if you had a blunt chisel. So if you're using a blunt chisel you might end up using a bit of extra force, and in the case where maybe the object snaps it can harm you and you might be injured. So let's say this is true. So the second question says, hold your work firmly in your hand when using a chisel. This statement, when you analyze it, hold your work firmly in your hand when using a chisel, this is a safety hazard. The reason being is when you go in a workshop, let's talk of, for instance, a wood workshop or even a metal workshop, you normally have benches, and those benches will have vices. So they'll have what are known as bench vices. So those are some examples of gripping tools which you can use. Apart from bench vices, you can even use clamps. But in a nutshell, what we're trying to say is when you're working with a piece in a workshop, you're supposed to make sure that you're working on a workshop bench and that piece has been gripped firmly, either with clamps or with benches, and you're not supposed to hold it in your hands because that is a very big safety hazard. So this statement here, hold your work firmly in your hand, no, you don't hold the work in your hand. This is false. And then the third question says, offcuts of materials need to be piled up neatly on your bench until it is time to finish the lesson. Again, piling up of work on your material is a safety hazard on its own, because in the first place you won't know whether you are cutting or you are doing the correct thing, because you might find that the workpiece might be crammed with offcuts of the material, and then that's just not very neat. So the statement that you're supposed to pile them up neatly on your bench is not true. So the best thing is maybe you pile them down, or I don't know, but piling them on the bench is not the correct statement. So this is false here. Then the fourth question says, a file can be used without the handle as long as the material is firmly clamped. This alone is a safety hazard, because we're guided when we have to use files to say always use a file with a proper handle. So never use a file which doesn't have a handle. Yeah, so A file is simply a tool or an equipment which is used for filing or removing those rough edges on a material. So you guys can look up pictures of what a file is. Yeah, so this course is pretty much advantageous to those that learned some woodwork or metalwork back in grade 9, because as you may have seen in chapter 1, we simply just looked at safety, and we didn't really go in details looking at some of these tools, screwdrivers, parts of a screwdriver. Yeah, but either ways, you can still do away without D&T. Just make sure that you research. So you need to know what a screwdriver is, the parts of a screwdriver, a file, a chisel, a mallet, a hammer, some of those tools which we commonly use in a workshop. You're just supposed to know them. So this statement here is false because we don't use a file without a handle. Then the fifth question says a screwdriver can be used to carry out a variety of tasks, including chiseling, hammering, and levering. No, this statement on its own is a safety hazard because a screwdriver is an instrument which has been designed to drive screws into a workpiece, and it should never be used for chiseling. The instrument or tool you're supposed to use for chiseling is called a chisel. Hammering, it's a hammer or maybe a mallet. And levering, you use a lever. So there's no way you can use a screwdriver where you're supposed to use a chisel. So that's a safety hazard. So this statement is false and it's a safety hazard. False. All tools need to be put back immediately after you use them. Yes, this is very much true. It's correct. So just say true. A G-clamp can be used to secure your work when planing to avoid any dangerous slipping. So like I earlier mentioned here, whenever you're working in a workshop, always work on a workshop bench and make sure that your workpieces are clamped using either bench vices or clamps. So a G-clamp is basically an example of clamps which you find in a workshop. So this statement is true the way it appears here. Yeah, so there are more questions. So number 8, it says always stop a machine before making adjustments. So the way the statement is, even in itself, it just makes sense. Like you're supposed to stop the machine before making any adjustment. Yeah, so this is also one of the workshop safety rules which you guys are supposed to know. Then number 9, hammers and pipes should be used to tighten nuts with a spanner. In as much as you see a lot of people doing this in most of the workshops, because I remember I worked in an auto mechanic workshop, and whenever a screw is a bit difficult to, or a nut is difficult to unscrew, for instance, if you are tightening wheel nuts or removing wheel nuts, they like to use a pipe because they're trying to make use of the lever arm principle, that if you extend the lever arm, then you apply a greater amount of force. But I'm here to tell you that that is a safety hazard, and never should you advise someone to do that. So it's best you use the correct tools. Yeah, so just use a spanner or find something else. Don't use a hammer or a pipe. So this is false. All power cards should be free from cuts, and any damage needs to be covered up with all power cords should be free from cuts, and any damage needs to be covered up with the tape. In as much as this statement sounds true, in its natural sense, it's not necessarily true. Quite alright, all power cords should be free from cuts. But then, if you have a damage, covering it up with tape will not really do anything. In as much as, yes, that is what you do in your day-to-day lives or in your homes. But I'm here to tell you that the best thing to do is to replace the cord, just buy a new one instead of putting tape there, because that in itself is a safety hazard. So it looks expensive buying a new cord, but the best thing is just buy a new one. So this statement is false. The machine should always be stopped before taking measurements. Yes, this statement is true. Your hands should always be behind the cutting edge of a chisel when you're using it. Yes, this is pretty much true as well, especially if you've worked in a workshop before. So I remember when I used to take wood workshop, I was making a tool, and then I had placed my hand in front of the chisel and I was trying to remove some wood pieces, and then when it slipped from the wood piece, it directly entered my hand and it almost went direct into the bone, and there was a lot of blood, and you really don't want to do that. So make sure that your hands are placed behind, so that in case the chisel slips out, it doesn't harm you. Then number 13, it says a clean workspace reduces the risk of injury. Yes, this is pretty much true, because if you have hammers, staples, whatever lying around the workshop, you might tremble and fall, and it can be quite risky for you. So number 14, it says machines must not be used unless a technician supervisor is present and you have been granted permission. This is true, and remember, this was also a safety rule which I gave you in the previous video. I think it should have been the last or the second last one. Say never enter or use machines unless you have been granted permission by the demonstrator. Then number 15, it says a vise helps secure materials and avoids the chance of slipping when cutting. So remember, this is a statement I had made to say, when working in a workshop, always ensure that you work on a workshop bench and the material or equipment you are working with is firmly secured on the bench using either a bench vise or clamps. So yes, a bench vise is a tool which can help you secure the material. Yeah, so this has been a classical exam kind of a question. So if you understood chapter 1 very well, particularly if you understood the safety rules for students. So I did mention to say there were a lot, but then we just looked at 10 of them. So of course you can go on to look out for more safety rules, and you should be able to answer such similar questions in the near future. So I'm going to end the video here, and I thank you.